Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Dyspraxia from a Global Perspective panel. I'm joined today by lovely panelists from multiple countries across the world. If you are tuning in on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, you can send us messages throughout using the comment section, and we will be able to see them. If you are live through Instagram, we don't see your messages instantly. The best place to do that is on YouTube, but we will see them, so don't worry. There just may be a slight delay in us replying. So today we're going to discuss various topics surrounding dyspraxia and awareness and support and how that differs around the world. Now, I'm going to introduce you to our panel members, and they're going to share us a little bit of information about who they are and where they're from. So we're going to go in order from who's next to me on the panel here. So Maria, please do introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Maria Pukhli, and I'm from Kyiv, Ukraine. Nice to meet you all.
Maya, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Maya. I'm a university student and a dyspraxic and disability advocate, and I'm calling in from Canada.
Amazing. Puneet.
Hello, this is Puneet, and I'm from New Delhi, India. I'm a person with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and stammering.
Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a neurodiversity trainer and advocate, and I'm based in the UK.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So we're going to start off really strong with today's session and really jump in with this question here. What barriers do you face in your country surrounding gaining a diagnosis? Please, someone go first.
I can start off. Some of the
Amazing.
really common barriers in getting a diagnosis in Canada are a lack of awareness, as we don't actually call it dyspraxia, and we don't always even call it DCD, so developmental coordination disorder. We call it global apraxia, which really isolates us from the rest of knowledge and understanding of it globally. And if a diagnosis does not happen before age 18, it will likely never happen, as our diagnosis assessment protocol currently ends at age 18. So if you don't get noticed before you become an adult, it's very difficult to get any support or gain any awareness of it. So this really leads to a learning disability diagnosis, which is what we call an SBLD diagnosis in Canada. So in addition to a dyspraxia diagnosis, individuals tend to get an LD diagnosis, BLD diagnosis, because our understanding of global apraxia or dyspraxia or DCD, whatever name you'd like to call it, is that it only affects motor coordination and it has no effects beyond that. So to make up with the effects with learning, that's why we add on an SBLD LD diagnosis. And this really leads to late diagnoses of an LD, which really just dyspraxia, which occurred to me in my teens. And additional factors include the price associated with it, which is currently running around $3,000 to $5,000 Canadian, which many families cannot afford.
Yeah, that's quite expensive, isn't it? Puneet, what would you say the challenges are in India?
I would say the professionals are not that professional. It sounds funny, but yeah, because uh, actually when it comes to learning disabilities, they are not able to specify which learning disability as of such. And also, there is not lack of training or lack of infrastructure as such, because these people have that thing. That's why they are charging too much for to us. But the problem is that uh, they feel that, what is the need of a diagnosis, like how a diagnosis will help. And that's the attitudinal problem which we face. Because when I was talking uh, to my person, he was more concerned about what I'm doing in my life. And as he come to know that I'm doing good in my life, he said, why do you need a diagnosis then? So I think this kind of approach is not going to help. And it's very demeaning, and it's like, they are sweeping us under somewhere, it's very dismissive, to say the least. So I think I would say that the process itself, and the process before that and after that, is very difficult. The whole experience is not easy, it's very exhausting, and very it has to be, on the other side, it has to be really good, because if a person is going, and it must be a liberating experience, but it's quite the opposite.
Amazing. That's a really good insight. Thank you. Maria, how would you describe that in Ukraine?
Well, the greatest barrier in to diagnosis in Ukraine by far is lack of awareness.
Hmm.
However, there have been some great strides made in the helping professions towards a greater understanding of neurodivergence in general in recent years, and specifically dyspraxia. Still, there is a lot to be done, as many professionals don't even believe in neurodivergence as we know it now, relying on uh, obsolete, incorrect knowledge instead. Some aren't even strangers to pseudoscience.
Mm.
Unfortunately, even some of the healthcare professionals that are aware of dyspraxia and other neurodivergences believe they are, so to say, kids' disorders. It's as if uh, all developmental conditions mysteriously disappear after a person, when if they're diagnosed in childhood, uh, just lose their diagnosis or something. Uh, of course, getting a diagnosis for children has become more widespread in recent years, but retaining the diagnosis after 18 is still very much an uphill battle. And of course, there are thousands of neurodivergent adults, especially dyspraxic ones, who never got a chance to be diagnosed as children. And there are very few doctors in Ukraine who work with dyspraxic adults. The problem is further exacerbated by the current brain drain, as many knowledgeable professionals, including doctors or mental health professionals, live for other countries. So
Mm.
they live for greener pastures, and a lot of neurodivergent people are left here worse off. That includes both adults and children. However, I would say awareness is growing exponentially right now, and even some dyspraxic adults are starting to speak up themselves. For instance, Yulia Tovkes, Ukraine's preeminent speech and language pathologist, so to say, it came out as dyspraxic almost 2 years ago on Facebook. That being said, even she, one of the top professionals in her field, great champion for neurodiversity and acceptance, still remains undiagnosed officially.
I'm
So
seeing a
you
very
can get an idea.
common pattern there, yeah, especially with, as Mia was saying, with the Maya, sorry, that once you reach the age of 18, your neurodivergence just suddenly flutters away into the wind, and that seems to be a common theme that people expect, even though we know that that doesn't happen.
However, I believe the situation is about to change drastically very soon, because there is greater awareness of the condition themselves, greater media representation for neurodivergent people in general, and greater awareness, particularly among intellectuals, people with a platform, people in the creative industries and the helping professions. And let's face it, the start of Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine has become a wake-up call for many people to educate themselves in general. So ignorance, bigotry, and discrimination of any kind has suddenly become deeply uncool and mostly associated with the invaders. Of course, that is not the first time something like that has happened in human history, so you get the picture. And educating oneself, acceptance, diversity are suddenly cool. They're in. Thus, I believe there are a lot of amazing things to come for Ukraine's neurodivergent community, including dyspraxic individuals.
Amazing. That's a really good insight. Thank you for that. Moving on to our next topic. How do you find the awareness or lack of, as we mostly experience, affects acceptance, especially with those without a formal diagnosis? Thinking as well, for those who live in larger countries, how that differs in more rural areas versus more built up areas that might have more support. Yeah, how does that look?
Well, I'm somebody without a formal diagnosis. So when I do tell people I'm dyspraxic, I don't tell them it's self-diagnosis.
Mhm.
I just say I'm dyspraxic. I'm also autistic and I have ADHD. So generally, when I'm having those conversations, people are more shocked by the autism aspect. But then actually, it turns out more people than I expect have actually heard of dyspraxia. So I think now that diagnosis is getting better, and more kids are being diagnosed at a younger age, I think conversations are starting to happen in families, and people are learning about it through their friends and families, and they're learning actually what it is. So I think awareness is getting better, and that's improving acceptance a little bit. But I don't say I'm self-diagnosed because I still think, are people going to believe me? I think when they see me fall over my own feet when I try and stand up from the table we're sitting at, they then they will believe me. But yeah, I think it's getting better. We have a long way to go.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to add any more thoughts to this one?
Sure, I can. Similar to Liz, I will go about this from two views. I will talk a little bit about my experience in Canada, and then I actually did an exchange in the UK, and I really saw the differences between the two areas of awareness. In Canada, I have been told both by my high school and by my 30,000 student university that I am the only student to ever in the history of either institutions to come to accommodations with a dyspraxia diagnosis, and that they do not know what to do with that. They all told me, can you send me a pamphlet? Can you give me information on your diagnosis? Because we don't know what this is, and we've never heard of this, and there are no accommodations that we can see, obviously, that could connect to it. And then furthermore, without a diagnosis or any identified learning access needs in Canada in elementary and secondary school, is not possible to access any accommodations or support. And that really reduces the awareness of like what dyspraxia is and what it can affect. And likewise, that like continues into post-secondary and workplace stages, as accommodations require either a formal diagnosis of a disability or functional limitations that make up a disability to require support. So there's a lack of awareness of like that this even exists. In the UK, it's thought to affect 6 to 10% of the population, give or take, depending on the statistic. In Canada, we think it affects 2% of the population. So we're clearly missing a large quantity of people in testing, and just like a lack of an understanding of what it is. So for example, for me, I didn't know that dyspraxia affected anything other than motor coordination until I was 13, and I started researching it myself and learning about it by myself and talking to other dyspraxics online and listening to talks by the Dyspraxia Foundation UK. Like, it was never come up in my life before that it could affect learning or it could affect memory or anything of that realm. While when I was in the UK for my study abroad, I mentioned offhandedly to one of my friends, one of my classmates, oh, I'm dyspraxic. I'm not really sure how my reasonable adjustments work. And she was like, oh, dyspraxia is really common. This is the ways that it can work out. These are the ways that it's really accepted here. She would tell me if you asked pretty much anyone in the class, we'd all know what dyspraxia is, which is something I'd never really experienced before. I met one person who's dyspraxic in person when I was 16, and before coming to the UK, I'd never met anyone else in person. So there's just no awareness of it.
I'm really surprised. Well, I guess I'm not surprised, but just shocked at hearing that difference between Canada saying only 2% and then places like the UK suggesting around 6 to 10% of the population. That's a really big difference there. And I think that really does highlight quite a big difference in awareness there. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to add any more to that topic?
Yes, yes. So as much as we say that, as someone who has been advocating for disabilities, and as I have multiple disabilities, I would like to say that there is no hierarchy, there is no nothing like that. But in terms of having three disabilities, I have to choose that which one I would like to advocate for, because certainly dyspraxia is lacking the resources as well, because we are underestimating the numbers as well, which is quite obvious, like in most of the countries. As we compare, if you talk, I go to a lot of universities and other organizations as well. So people say that, okay, we know about dyslexia but we don't know about dyspraxia. So that's why I have decided to be more vocal about dyspraxia, because people are not aware. I think the dyslexia community doesn't need me that much. That much is me. I'm required in the dyspraxia community. So I think that is very very important, because uh, it's a vicious cycle. We will be underestimating people, and then we will not getting the resources required in research, in education, in all of these things, and it will be going round and round. Instead of breaking that cycle, we will be just continuing to play a part in this cycle. So that is very important, especially when we meet people with uh, people with dyspraxia, because it's very rare.
Mm.
Because of, not because people are not there, because numbers are there, it's proven, but maybe they are not getting the support, maybe they don't know themselves, and the gatekeeping that is there in the diagnosis, that self diagnosis is not considered authentic in most places. People say that, what is this. So I think that is also there, as much as we hate to say that, it is a reality in most parts of the world.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move on to our next topic here. And I think we've briefly touched on this, but how has internalized and societal ableism impacted the dyspraxia community? I know, Liz, you kind of touched on this as well in terms of not always sharing that your dyspraxia diagnosis isn't formal. And I'm guessing that's because of just that internalized ableism and that fear of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just, as people were speaking about awareness and acceptance, I was thinking, actually, my lack of awareness of what dyspraxia was before I knew that there was a name for this affected my acceptance of the challenges that come with it. And I thought I just had to try harder, and I was just clumsy, and I just that it was like a personal failing. I know Kathy's put in the chat about Australia is a super sporty country and motor difficulties are considered a joke, and that was my experience at school. It was like a running joke that on sports day it's like ready, set, go, and then oh okay, 5 seconds later Liz goes, oh, are we running? So I learned to laugh at myself, and I learned to make a joke of it so that I would kind of get there first, and then people couldn't make fun of me for it, because if you do the bullying to yourself, then it takes the fun out of it for other people. So I think you do carry some shame and some kind of like feeling like you've done something wrong and that there's something you could be doing better when actually it's not. It's something to do with the way your brain works, and it's just different. It's not a bad thing. I used to get called special a lot, and not in a nice way. And it was, I kind of felt like I have to do this to myself. I have to put myself down in order to stop other people doing it, and that just makes you feel even worse inside, because then even when people aren't being horrible to you, you still do it to yourself. So you can never get away from that, even when other people stop laughing at you. You have to learn to kind of love yourself,
Yeah, that's a very good point you raised there about kind of loving yourself, because sometimes it's difficult to, when you've got all those external voices, and I'm sure everyone watching as well could agree with, is, we grow up hearing a lot of words about ourselves that are quite negative when they're things that are completely out of our control. So finding that kind of love in yourself and being able to kind of lift yourself up is really important. It's difficult, especially difficult, but learning how to do that is quite key, I think. Would anyone else like to share on this topic? Sure.
I'd like to add that there is a touch of lateral ableism in the neurodivergent community directed at dyspraxia and dyspraxic people here in Ukraine. That is, we have our small but mighty autistic communities and ADHD communities, which are right now starting to fight for their rights. Both the parent community and the adult ADHD or autistic community. But there is basically no such thing for those of us who live with dyspraxia. Of course, dyspraxia is an often occurring condition for ADHD, autism, and the like. But even people in the neurodivergent communities who are also dyspraxic are often reluctant to discuss their dyspraxia or ways of obtaining their diagnosis. Despite the fact that getting a diagnosis is one of the hot topics in the ADHD or autistic community. People need their accommodations, their reasonable adjustments. They know they have disorder. They may recognize themselves in the symptoms, but they mostly keep mum about it. That can be put down to the lingering shame and stigma around clumsiness and lack of physical aptitude, which was ubiquitous in my childhood. I grew up in the 90s and noughties, and this is especially evident among people of my generation and older. Of course, the situation is different with today's younger generation, but they have one gigantic issue: their parents. Their parents grew up in a vastly different paradigm and mostly view their children and their abilities through a deficit lens. And of course, the lack of opportunities for adult diagnosis doesn't help it, because parent community needs adult dyspraxic role models too. They need to be aware of who their children may be when they grow up. But there are barely any opportunities for them to imagine that. Interestingly, even dyspraxic celebrities are hardly ever talked about as dyspraxic individuals here, but I believe this is largely in line with the global trends. We seldom hear of Daniel Radcliffe or Florence Welch as dyspraxic individuals, despite their support to fellow dyspraxics. It's as if we gloss it over ourselves. And even though Ukraine's dyspraxic community has recently gained a significant victory uh, with regards to the civil rights and employment rights, uh, that, as far as I'm aware, wasn't done. Well, as far as I'm aware, no dyspraxic individual has taken part in it. That is, according to the latest law on military draft, neurodivergent people, including those with dyspraxia, are allowed to serve in our military in non-combat roles. These are important and often lucrative jobs that also allow neurodivergent individuals place in Ukraine's modern historic record. I don't know what it is if it isn't a huge win. And I don't know what it is if it isn't progressive, but it's seldom discussed through this lens. Moreover, even individuals, or adults who have this diagnosis and come to medical examination to assess their combat fitness, uh, often don't get those specific diagnoses after their examinations. Doctors working on those are mostly equipped with obsolete, old fashioned knowledge, out of step with modern medical consensus. So most of us are labeled with some kind of brain damage, even if there is no evidence to support this hypothesis. That happened to a dyspraxic person I know who actually had a formal ADHD and autism diagnosis, but instead uh, got some version of brain damage with elements of autistic behavior uh, on their record, and that's it.
Hmm. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think as well, what really struck me when you mentioned about the adults and having that what's the word I'm thinking of? The role models. You raise a really valid point there. If we're, as worldwide, we're struggling to diagnose people at a young age, and so the chances of there being adult role models who are aware that they're dyspraxic, for that younger generation who's still growing up and maybe have that fear of their future. I'm not sure if anyone else or anyone watching has any kind of relation to that when you're younger, that fear of your future when you're struggling at school and struggling, socially as well, especially with bullying, what that's going to look like. And so having those role models is so, so important. So thank you for raising that. I'm going to move us on to our next topic now. How does age, gender, race, and social economic status impact dyspraxic people? It's a very in-depth one. I wondered if anyone would like to tackle this question.
Yes, I would like to go for that.
Sure.
So I'm community lead for a network called the Global Network of Young Persons with Disability,
Mhm.
and it was formed because once you are disabled and then you are young, there are two things that people doesn't give you the agency over your life, over your bodies. And the kind of assumption that young people are immature, they cannot take their life decisions, and all of these like biases that we have against young people because of certain assumptions again. So it's like again a very problematic thing. So it really plays a very significant part because you are, either way you consider immature, and then you have a disability which affects your motor condition. People assume that, okay, this is due to some kind of, yeah, this another incompetency. Yeah, so it adds up to that already, that the unconscious bias they have. So the age is certainly a very important factor, because people don't see us as leaders. You have to be a certain age. You have to look in a certain way. Especially like gender as well. If you are a cisgender heterosexual male, then I think you are more you assume to be a leader. So that these assumptions, these biases are very counterproductive for our community, and it snatches away the agency and the autonomous power that we have over our lives and bodies. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Would anyone else like to share some words on this one? No, that's fine. In terms of this one, I think when we're talking about age and gender as well, um, I think Paneet, you mentioned that young boys, there's this kind of expectation for young boys to be perfectly coordinated, very sporty, and to want to do those things. And if they're not doing those things, and they're not, super coordinated and able to kick a football, then the bullying there gets really, really intense. And it's something that we see a lot within our communities, that the young boys are kind of sharing with us. And there was also a brief discussion on it yesterday, or at some point during the week as well, that quite often at schools and colleges, the sports that you're expected to partake in, there's a high expectation to take part in those, even though there's multiple other sports that are quite, I don't know, dyspraxia friendly. I'm not sure if that kind of goes in hand, but there are some sports that, we can strive more in, especially when you think about things like horse riding, archery, swimming. These things don't very rarely take in schools unless you're at, like a privileged private school, and even then, and girls, for example, are almost expected to not be coordinated, and that's when we see a lot of girls being missed in a diagnosis. Um, with Dyspraxia Magazine a few years ago, we did a peer research, and 84% of the women um, said that they didn't receive their diagnosis till after the age of 16 to 18. So 84% of those, that's incredibly high. And that's when we level out the gender balance between boys and girls, because in the past we've believed that it's mostly boys who are dyspraxic, and we now know that that's not the case. So yeah, that's quite intense there.
And also too, just when you were talking about these things, masculinity, it's a very
Mm,
uh, uh, problematic concept, which in regards to disabilities. So for example, there was this part in certain time duration of the literature, gay men and people with stammering, because stammering is also, a lot of dyspraxic people tend to
mm,
stammer as well. So they said that gay men and the men who stutter or stammer are not man enough.
mm,
So that was also a kind of assumption. And plus, nowadays I hear lot of my friends and lot of people in the pop culture says that man drive manual, because dyspraxic people will tend to drive more automatic cars. It's difficult for us to drive these manual cars. So this is another kind of gatekeeping, I would say, to masculinity as well, which is itself a very flawed concept in the gender studies itself. So yeah.
Amazing. Yes, go ahead.
However, I'd also like to add that while gross motor skills are regarded as extremely important for a young man as part of the performance of masculinity, so to say. There are also fine motor skills, which can also be affected by dyspraxia. That is the case for me. While I managed to somewhat refine my gross motor skills, even though that took me approximately 8 years or something of really intense training at the gym. My fine motor skills are still nearly non-existent, and as we all know, uh, housework and a lot of handicraft have historically been associated with women and femininity. It's often viewed as women's work. And if you physically can succeed at women's work, you, uh, especially if you hail from a fairly conservative society, viewed as a failed woman.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the first probable description of dyspraxia by a medical professional that we know of, which is from ancient Rome, penned by Galen, explicitly mentions that coordination issues mostly affect women. However, as a dyspraxic friend of mine has pointed out, there might be a really sinister reason behind that. A lot of dyspraxic young men back then just didn't make it to adolescence or even, let alone adulthood.
Mhm. Yeah, I think also in terms of the socio-economic side, something we touched on at the beginning was around cost as well. So if you are able to gain a diagnosis under the age of 18, that in itself is a huge privilege, especially for white people. They're more likely to gain that. Whereas, you know, after that age, especially if you're a non-white person and you're black, you're more likely to be expected to pay an extortionate amount. But then you've also got to find someone who's going to do that. And that's something I see a lot within our communities, people struggling to find that route, let alone one that's of like a cost value.
Just to add on to what you're saying, Crystal, like in Canada, one of the, I think it's similar in the US as well, but we have an individual education plan as our system for elementary school and high school students. And if there's a student who is identified with an access need that's learning related, it will be paid for by the province or the state, the assessment. But if for example, for dyspraxia, because it affects motor coordination as the fundamental piece, and then learning as the secondary piece is what it's understood as in Canada, we don't, like, the assessment doesn't, if it doesn't get caught before like elementary school, it doesn't usually get caught in general. So for me, I'm really lucky. I was diagnosed with dyspraxia when I was 2, but that is not common. And that is very much of my parents pushed and were like, this isn't normal. And my pediatrician was very, very intelligent and very understanding, but it's very difficult to get a diagnosis in Canada, like post 18, as I mentioned already, but also for women, we're very unlikely to be identified. So, for example, in my university classroom, half of my program is neurodivergent. Of that group, 90% have pursued a diagnosis in university and like have been actively searching for practitioners that are like focused on presentations in women, focused on presentations in gender non-conforming or genderqueer or non-binary people, and looking at it from an angle of late diagnosis, because it is very, very difficult to be identified before the assessment protocol ends in Canada.
Amazing. That kind of leads us into our next topic as well, around education, is what support is available within the work and education environments, based on your experience, because you're currently in university at the moment. How would you say that is reflective, and like what does that look like?
So it reflects really differently. I've actually now done a US program, a UK program, and a Canadian program in university. So the accommodations were quite different all across the world when I did it. But some of, like, once we got over the hump of dyspraxia exists, I did have to meet with the head of exams to discuss what dyspraxia is, what are typical accommodations, as I was told that accommodations that are very typical in the UK that I've received before would no longer be accessible for me. Some of the accommodations that I receive are like enlarged text size, private testing room. Other common ones are extra time for written response exams. I get extra time for oral presentations because I have developmental verbal dyspraxia as well. But other ones are scribes, note takers, being able to record lectures, flexible deadlines, rest breaks. A lot of these are the same in the UK for reasonable adjustments of like what I received there. One big difference in the UK was that they saw my list of accommodations and what I typically receive in a Canadian institution and told me, my LD-SBLD diagnosis is just dyspraxia. And they also told me that we don't feel the need to do exams. We'll do everything as a take-home instead. So that was a really big shift. I was told my entire university career that take-homes were never an option. And the UK university that I did was like, take-homes, absolutely. Like, I didn't ask for it. They were like, this is what we're doing. And then the US institution did a lot of the same accommodations. That was a very, very small program. There was only 3 of us with accommodations. So some things were different, but we were always given more time. We were always given like rest breaks, a small group of testing room or a private testing room, being able to record lectures, having a note taker were really common things that we received.
Amazing. Does anyone else have any kind of experience with accommodations and things like that?
I have to say, for the first time in probably since 2016, I'm actually proud to be British. It's really good to hear that our university, like our education systems, are doing that for students. That's amazing. I think workplaces have a bit more, bit of catching up to do with them. What I do is I train workplaces and explain what reasonable adjustments are and like try and give examples of them. I think some things that can be useful in a workplace are having a tablet or a laptop for typing rather than handwriting, or being allowed to use transcription features. So attending meetings virtually, having the captions, having the auto transcription. Something that's been done for me when I had to go and deliver training somewhere, and they gave me a really clear map of the venue, how to get there, and they actually somebody went to the tube station and took a video of them walking to the venue so that I could see all the landmarks, like I knew I wasn't going to get lost. So really clear maps and directions, videos, like pictures of the location you're going to be in as well, so that you know if there's going to be something that you might struggle with, like particularly high chairs, for example. Like that's I see a high chair and I'm like, okay, so now my anxiety is spiked and I'm supposed to be talking to people while trying to navigate furniture, and it's just not going to work. So furniture can be something that most people don't even think about. So adaptive furniture is really, really useful. I think for uniforms, like work uniforms or school uniforms, a bit of flexibility there, because buttons and zips can be really difficult. Lace-up shoes, if you're expected to wear lace-up shoes, but actually shoelaces are not happening, I think people need to be given accommodations there. And allowance to like not have to do things that you cannot do. So if collating paperwork or stapling things is too much of a challenge, like you shouldn't have to do that. Somebody else could do that bit of your job for you. I think sometimes there's this idea that we have to strictly stick to our job roles and we have to do every single tiny task that's part of our job perfectly. Actually, we should be able to farm out things we can't do to people who can. And there's always something you can swap. There's always something that we'll be able to do in return for that person. So I think a bit of tolerance and understanding and willingness to help will help.
Amazing, thank you. I've recently been redoing my assessment for a program that we have in the UK called Access to Work. So if anyone is in the UK, if you apply to Access to Work, it's a government scheme. If you do it within the first, I think, 6 weeks of joining, there's a grant that covers the majority of what's recommended. And you have an assessment. They advise a number of things. So, for example, I've got an ergonomic chair that's built to my size, an ergonomic mouse and keyboard. So I've got a mouse that sits on the side instead of like that, and that really helps me with my joints. One-to-one work coaching. And if you're already in a company and you've been there for a long time, you can still get access to it. Your company may just be asked to pay a contribution towards that. But anything like training and mental health support is usually provided for free anyway. It's normally just equipment that has an additional cost, but you yourself wouldn't expect it to be to cover those things, which is really, really good. It's also available to people who work for themselves, so sole traders. And that's something I really, really recommend looking into, because it's something that's helped me tremendously in the workplace. It's a huge help, especially the training that's for my colleagues as well, to help them work with me better and give them a better understanding of my disability. And a lot of people don't take advantage of that, and I really think they should. I think there's a stigma sometimes behind using things like that. And there's that whole kind of, well, I'm not going to use it because someone else who needs it more than me should use it. Please don't think like that. No one needs it more or less than anyone. If you know, if it's available to you, which it will be, you don't have to have a formal diagnosis for that either. It's based on support needs, not diagnosis. So even if you don't have any official diagnoses, you can still have access to those things. So I highly recommend, if you're from the UK, checking those out. I don't know the alternatives in different countries, I'm afraid. Amazing. Thank you for sharing all that with us. I'm going to move us over to our final question before we go to Q&A. So I'm just going to remind our audience, if you're watching live, obviously if you're watching the playback, this won't necessarily apply to you, but please do message us through the comments. We do get to see them. If you're watching through Instagram, we don't see those directly in front of us, but I can relay them back. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panel members, please do that. But before we go on to our Q&A section, I think this is a really important topic because it covers lots of things around mental health and support. But have you been able to find a community within your country, and how has that supported you?
Okay, so locally, not really. We did have a Dyspraxia Canada group during the pandemic, headed up by Rosemary Richings, who's absolutely amazing and also watching this panel right now. But she really helped us like build awareness and like try and run like weekly activities and talks and discussions and looking at what does university look like? What does being in a workplace look like? It was really, really awesome. That being said, we had at most around 5 people in the support group, and usually it was the 2 of us who showed up. I've spoken to dyspraxics in Canada via social media and to parents directly over the last 9 years. And rather than gaining, like, although I've gained some level of a community there, it's been difficult to just meet people because a lot of people are across different provinces. Due to like the issues finding dyspraxics locally, I really did turn to the online community. And I also volunteer with local disability groups, such as teaching autistics how to cook, as there's a lot of overlap between the autistic youth members there who also have dyspraxia, whether diagnosed formally or not. And I really like to give back to my local community, regardless if our disabilities look different, as we still have a lot of similarities. A really good example of this is I volunteered at a congregated elementary school, and one of my favorite moments there is that one of my kids in the room told me, after hearing that I also have a disability, is, "Oh my gosh, you're just like me." He was 6 years old, and he was like, "You do speech therapy like me, you do occupational therapy like me." It's just really amazing to hear that there's an older version of me, and even if we don't have the same disabilities, it's really important for him, and it was important for me as well, to see that there's other people like me and other people who understand what I'm going through and have done it before. So that's kind of why I really try and reach out, and I used to spend around 15 to 20 hours speaking to families and individuals online, both locally and internationally, and I still try and do around 10 to 12 hours a week.
Amazing. Would anyone else like to share their experiences with finding a community in their country?
Yes. So I think uh, with India, such a massive country, it's a saying that whatever you say about India is true, and whatever you don't say about India is also true. So the scale is so much, and also with new technology, we have communities, and we have apps for everything. you know uh, Maybe we just go to Play Store, and you search something, there will be something for that service. So with that regards, support groups are coming, and the kind of, I would say, the kind of inspiration that we have took from the LGBTQ movement, the neurodiversity movement has taken a lot of things uh, from the other movement, and this is very important. If we learn from other movements as well, be it the today's the World Mental Health Day, and we all know that we are, as neurodiversity individuals, we are more prone to having mental health issues. So with that being said, I think there are communities, but still, like, to be engaged throughout the year, it's a very big challenge, because people are involved in so much of time, and meeting physically is the key, because we have a lot of WhatsApp groups, we have all of these things, and people are tired for like Zoom calls. If they can uh, meet, they if there is a possibility of meeting within a city, I think that is more than welcome. Yes, we have a lot of people that are still masking, they're all kind of precautions that is going through. But I think that human touch of meeting somewhere in a garden, in a park, it's always a very refreshing chance. Maybe the numbers are very less, but we still try to meet and do that part. So I know that there is a platform that organizes such meetings, and such communities, all always, like, in every part of the country, and every time of the year. So it is, I guess, I think we are improving, to say the least, to conclude, so that we are on the path. And that being said, people also say that it's in trend as well. Like, being neurodiverse is in trend. The Gen Z's are finding it cool to say that, that they are autistic, they are dyslexic, they have ADHD, all of these things. So I think you will find everything. It's a wonderful conversation, and how we people answer that, that okay, if it is trendy, like why it's a trend, why more and more people are coming out. So yeah, it's getting interesting, and it's getting heaten up as well.
Amazing. It's good to hear that, across various countries that it's improving. Maria, you mentioned as well earlier that, that there's lots of wins for the community there, and the support is getting better, and they're coming together a lot more to kind of celebrate, even though the majority is kind of focused around ADHD and autism. It's good to see that, your dyspraxia community is growing in Ukraine as well, especially with everything that's going on there at the moment. As you've said, everyone's kind of come together a bit, which is really nice to hear.
Yes.
I mean, in the UK, we're very privileged here in terms of communities. You just have to type into Facebook dyspraxia, and it comes up with 10 plus community groups. There's all sorts in there. The majority of them very similar. Kind of came about during COVID, or at least they became much more popular then. We were doing things like lots of video calls, virtual meetups, even like art groups. There was fitness groups, which were really, really great. So it has slowed down a little bit now that the world has kind of gotten back to normal, should that be a thing. So the need for that has kind of decreased slightly, but I think for our community, we've really held on to that, which I'm really glad to see. Especially when, we're surrounding mental health, and we've mentioned it a few times, having those, adult figures, and seeing how they progress, and just being able to interact with someone and kind of look up to them, that means a lot, especially for the younger generation. um, I'm going to move us now into the Q&A section. We've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm just going to scroll through them quickly. So if I go quiet, it's just because I'm trying to read at the same time. I'm not very good at doing both. So we've got this one here. So for UK university new students, any advice on how to get support from uni? What kind of support can we apply for?
I can go for this one if you want.
Sure.
I just did that last summer. So you want to send in your diagnosis papers, as well as within the diagnosis papers, it should have a list of recommended and common reasonable adjustments for your university to administer. So some of mine that I received at my university. This one's really cool, and it's across the UK that all universities offer this, and they call it the dyslexia marking label. But they use the word dyslexia to mean all SBLDs, including dyspraxia, which is like really confusing. As a neurodivergent person reading it for the first time, it just means all of us. But if they put this marking, you can put this marking label on all of your assignments and your presentations and your exams, and that means that they have specific guidelines that they use to mark your work. So, for example, some of my favorite guidelines from that whole document that they have is that we're getting marked based on content. We're not getting marked as much on grammar or spelling or organization of the paragraphs, which are all really areas that are known to be really big struggles for dyspraxic students. And tend to be areas that, like, I've talked about this with so many people in like educational institutional power in Canada, but these are areas that, like, the rest of the world, we're not acknowledging that this is something that doesn't really get better with specialist help. Other accommodations that I received were notes and handouts online in advance of lectures, being able to record lectures, flexibility with deadlines, and 25% extra time for presentations. Testing accommodations, as I said, could be a scribe, it could be a computer, it could be specialty like voice to text or text to speech, if those are areas that are really needed for you. Extra time is a really common area. My biggest recommendation to domestic UK students is to apply for DSA. It is a lifesaver. It is really, really helpful. It is awesome, and it really gives you access to specialist mentors. It gives you access to getting your own. They'll pay for part of your computer. They'll pay for a printer and paper and ink for you. There's a lot of different things that DSA pays for, and if you're domestic in the UK, at a UK university, it is a godsend to have it. And if you're not domestic, they also will offer you accommodations or reasonable adjustments without it.
Amazing. That was very descriptive. Thank you. I think in terms of how to get that, just speak to your tutor and they will direct you to your, I think every university has a slightly different name. Sometimes it's the disability and inclusion team, disability team, but your tutor will be able to direct you to the right people. And the next question I've got has come through on um, Instagram, and lots of people have been responding to this question as well, which has been really helpful. So the question is, any advice on how to support my dyspraxia 7-year-old who's beginning to realize he is having struggles that his friends don't have? I'm going to put this question out to everyone watching as well. Some of you have already responded to this question, which is really helpful. Um, but yeah, would anyone kind of within the panel like to add to that?
I can go for
Sure.
it, but please interrupt me if you have
Yeah.
other ideas. I think it's really important to acknowledge to kids that they are different and affirm their strengths. So,
Mhm.
my parents told me around that age, you have dyspraxia. Dyspraxia means your brain sends messages to your muscles and they take longer to respond. And that's okay. It's okay that you do speech therapy and the rest of your kids in your classroom don't. And a really big thing for me was I went to a very hippie elementary school that was inclusion oriented and inclusion and integration focused. So it was all we would always have discussions like, what does disability look like for someone else? What does it look like to need help with this? And it's always okay to ask for help. So looking at it through the lens of what are his strengths rather than what are only focusing on his weaknesses, because when you only focus on someone's weaknesses, that really has a serious impact and can have a lasting impact on mental health.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially with telling young people. Quite often I see messages that are sent into Dyspraxia magazine and a survey we did a while ago. I can't remember the exact results in terms of like numbers, but the majority of people who weren't told that they'd received a dyspraxia diagnosis from a young age, so this is specifically to people who did have a diagnosis, and they either weren't told ever or they weren't told until they were much older, they found that very difficult, and it really affected their relationship with their parents in terms of trust, and feeling let down and almost betrayed, because young people, they know when they're different. Everyone around them tells them. Children can be the worst, and they will say exactly what's on their mind, and they can be very hurtful with the things that they say. So you know young people are hearing that they're different. So yeah, I definitely encourage telling them, don't hold back, because knowledge is power, and if they know what makes them different, it can just help them in the long run. So I definitely recommend that. I'm just going through the questions. There's quite a lot around university, but I think we've already answered those. There's just one question here, asking what are the support groups and communities in London for UK students. The first thing that pops to my mind is there's a local London charity called Dyspraxic Me, and I have a feeling some of those people might be watching today. But they are a very good charity. They host online events and in-person events. So definitely check out their social media to see what they've kind of got going on. Already, I think they've already done events, or they've got an event happening. I think it happened yesterday actually, for Dyspraxia Awareness Week. So definitely do check them out. They're based in London. I don't know if anyone knows of any other London groups.
University students, you want to look on campus. I know my university wasn't London based, but we had an Enable club, which was for any disabilities, and then we had an autism specific one. And the autism specific one just had a lot, like pretty much every member of it was dyspraxic. So even though I went just as a dyspraxic, I found it really, really enjoyable because it was a really good group of people who understood what dyspraxia was and could help me navigate the space, like as a newcomer in the UK.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to the end of our hour session. We have run over by almost 5 minutes. That always happens. Thank you again, everyone who has tuned in to watch us live and engage with us and ask questions. And thank you again to my panel members for joining us. This has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you very, very much. And we'll all say goodbye now. So have a wonderful evening and